Hello, everyone. Welcome to the episode of Land, Oceans, and Business. Actually, I was going to say the number, but I kind of forgot, which is a great sign because that means that we're already starting to increase the number of episodes here, so that's amazing. I am super happy to have as a guest today Trevin York, founder of Dire Lark, a game design studio focused on creating meaningful, lasting change through gameplay. With over a decade of experience, Trevin has worked with amazing teams across the globe to craft games and interactive experiences that inspire action. I'm super excited about this episode because it's really the beautiful sweet spot between gaming and environmental impact. So I think we're just going to be discussing green gaming overall and how sustainability and storytelling slowly come together to drive engagement and environmental change. So yeah, I think this is a very nice intro, and for the rest, Trevin, welcome to Land, Oceans, and Business. We're super happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for that really kind introduction. You made me sound very impressive.
Well, I think you are. So anyways, I think it's going to be a really, really interesting conversation. But just as a starting point, I thought it would be great to warm up the audience for you to give a little intro about yourself and about Dire Lark and the work that you've been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you just said, right, I'm the founder and director of Dire Lark, which is a game design for change studio based in Scotland. So we make games, we help other game dev teams and other organizations make games, and we research how to design for change with games more effectively. And I think, as we talk today, you're going to hear a little bit about maybe all of those categories as we go along. I have spent my entire career designing games for social impact, designing games for change. First starting out in games for financial capability and financial literacy in California. And then we, as a team, started to realize our skills and our experience could kind of transfer to other complex, important areas and domains. The world was warming up, and in California, I was living through increasingly intense forest fires. And that led me to kind of wake up to the reality of the climate crisis and feel like if I could contribute in some small way, that would be great, which is what led me to go learn more. So I got my master's in design for change from the University of Edinburgh, which is how I ended up in Scotland. And now I get to pull together all my experience and all my learning into my work, which I'm really, really grateful for. I'm really grateful that I got to do this for a living.
So cool, Trevin. That's amazing and super interesting, right? Because with gaming, we don't really think, now we're starting to think about the potential of games for change, games for environmental and social impact. And right now, it almost feels like it's becoming a new genre in a way or another. So I think that's super interesting. Actually, before my next question, I wanted to ask you first something that just resonated a lot here, because you were talking about games for change. And I feel like that says so much, but also it's very hard to grasp, right, what games for change means. Just like sustainability, like sustainability for me, it's such a complex word to understand and grasp. So what is games for change? What are games for change? What does that entail?
That's a really good question, in part because I think if you asked a bunch of different people who work in this space this question, you're going to get similar but not maybe exactly the same answers. A lot of my understanding, a lot of how I think about it now is really informed by what I learned for my master's, which wasn't a game design program. It was a broader design for change program, looking at different toolkits and different approaches from across the different types and facets of designs around the world. And it really focused on when you approach really complex, maybe global issues or large social issues, you get issues that inevitably find themselves at the intersection of social challenges, of environmental challenges, of technological challenges. These things are all kind of messily intertwined and affect each other, right?
Yeah.
And that means often these are contexts that are too big to fully comprehend as an individual person or even as a team of people, which is not to say that we can't do really good work in them. It just means our approach has to be a little bit different. If you have a straightforward problem that you can fully explain and describe and write down, then you can diagnose one solution and then work towards that one solution. With these really messy, complicated contexts, the approach is more often how do we take a step towards resolving this context so that we're one step better? How can we leave this better than we found it? The goal is no longer how do we solve this, how do we fix it once and for all. It's how do we get better? And then once we make it better, okay, let's reassess, let's look around. What do we learn? What maybe happened that we didn't expect? What went well? Let's make things one step better again. Let's make things one step better again. For me, game design for change is just taking that framework, that approach into and kind of leveraging what is, I think, special about games and play, which is not a thing, right, that I'm inventing. I'm sure you've heard maybe from other guests, and I know you know from conversations just in general, right? We have now decades of books and talks and discourse of how games intersect with education and games intersect with behavior and games intersect with just engagement and attention and games and play, right? Animals play. People have played since as long as there have been people. It's part of who we are and how we live and how we experience the world. And it creates a special context through which we can think about challenges that would otherwise be really stressful, or problem solve in a context that's one step removed from the real world, so that we can then transfer something to the real world. There's Sabrina Solbuk came up with, she wrote the transformational game design framework is her work. And that has a definition of transformational game design, which is game design with the intent of a transformation in the player that persists beyond the end of playing the game. So where the goal is for a player to maybe be moved by the game or impacted by the game while they're playing, which I think many, if not all games, have a goal of. But then with an added goal of let's leave the player changed in some way or moved in some way that lasts. And a lot of game design for change work, I believe, is focused on that extra challenge of how do we leave a lasting impact, a positive lasting impact, ideally. Does that answer the question? I think so.
Yeah, it does actually. Yeah, and I think the fact that you mentioned education here makes so much sense, right? You know, like just about this, it's so relevant because yesterday we posted a social media post on Instagram, and it was about celebrating World Tiger Day. And we got so much engagement, so many comments, so many replies on our chat. And it was from gamers, actually, which is our main community. And Fantastic. They were all saying, like, there is such a potential to educate through games, through storytelling. And it's so great what you guys are doing here. Like, you know, just as environmental rewards, which is our main product at .seco, but also in social media, using the channel to educate players. You know, there's such an unexplored territory and such a growing industry here. And one of the comments was this gamer, and she was so grateful, and she was like, there's such a potential to unlock here to educate all of us, because you have people from all the ages, from all the backgrounds. And I just think it's super relevant to what you're talking about here, which is like just designing the game with education, with technology, with all of these things intersecting together, and then iterating, seeing what works and what doesn't. So just to jump on to the next question, which I think is super connected to what I just said here and what you've already talked about, is what does green gaming mean to you, and how does it shape the mission and direction of the work of Dire Lark?
Yeah, this is a big question. It's a good question. It's a very big question, which I only say because if my answer gets too big, this is where I think you should cut me off.
I will. Right. Don't worry about it.
Because it's a lot of things. It's a big category. And I think it's important that it's good that it's a big category, right? It includes games created in response to environmental concerns, right? A team might feel anxious or moved to create art in response to what they're living through. This also includes, though, games created with maybe the intention of positively intervening in environmental matters or the climate crisis or sustainability. It might be games that operate as sustainably as possible, or with production practices or operations that maybe emit less carbon themselves or use less energy, for example. And I'm definitely not saying a green game has to be all these things at once, obviously, to be a green game.
No, almost impossible.
Right?
I think it's very, very tricky.
Yeah, but often they kind of end up getting all tangled together anyway. So, for example, maybe a team is inspired by the many heat waves we've experienced in Europe and now North America, right, this summer. And they want to make art about that. They want to connect with their players about that. So they do some research, they get some inspiration, they learn various ways that are maybe better or worse to cope with extreme heat, and they put that into the game because it's fun to think about different games are great opportunities to think through challenges and puzzle out solutions. And now the game kind of accidentally has some educational value. It's not an educational game necessarily, but it's introducing players to these really important concepts that might help them cope with future heat waves. And then maybe the team starts looking into ways to make their game run in as little electricity as possible, which might make sense for a heat game because, right, when we play games, energy-intensive games produce heat. So like your PlayStation or your desktop, you don't want to play a game.
It's about coherency as well.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And if it's super hot inside, you don't want to turn on a game console because it's going to make it hotter. Yeah. So maybe your heat wave game also uses less energy, so it becomes a game your players can play in the heat wave. And just so really quickly, it just all kind of wraps up really tightly. There's a book called The Ecological Thought by Timothy Morton. It's a little book. I think it's published in like 2010. It just really nicely explores that concept of when you're thinking about the ecological crisis, every challenge, every problem, every intervention, would you like tug on the threads of what it connects to? It connects to everything. It's like a tangled web of cause and effects.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what you say here about trying to tackle all things at once, it's very hard. It's what I always share personally and professionally, like being sustainable. No one is exempted from the climate crisis.
Right.
It's impossible, right? So I think as businesses, there's a responsibility, and not just a responsibility, but there's also what the gamers are asking for, right? Because that's a whole different story. There's the responsibility and then there's the demand that there is. And it's about how can we create a game that answers for the needs of what gamers are asking for, but also acts in a responsible and coherent way. But I do think that expecting a company in general to be all around sustainable with their scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, then the energy, then the storytelling, then the type of audience that they have, it's very, very hard. I wouldn't say it's impossible. I said it was almost impossible, and I stand by that. I don't think it's impossible, but I think it's something very hard, and I almost think that you would have to build the core that is all about building with sustainability foundations, which is something that I think will be the next level in the industry and in general in all of the industries, just because there's a demand from it for consumers and from the next generations, but also because there's the responsibility that there is in a way.
Yeah, no, I like what you said. It ties back to what we were just talking about a few minutes ago, right? Where if your approach is then doing things one step at a time, one challenge at a time, and then moving on from there. And then what we're talking about is a process-oriented approach instead of an outcome-oriented approach. How can we work in a way that equips us to move towards this almost impossible but definitely achievable goal? Can we think about the process that'll get us there? And if we can keep iterating on that, then we'll get closer and closer and closer, and then we will get there.
Yeah, I think it's very intimidating. I was in a conference in Hamburg about a month ago, and we had a booth there with a stand with a colleague of mine, and then some people approached from a huge company, very, very well known, and they were so skeptical about integrating any type of sustainability inside of their business model because of the potential threat to greenwashing. So, there's also this whole thing around sustainability about, if we're going to incorporate inside a game, this was a whole different company, but let's just focus on games. Like with sustainability, how can we make sure that we're not going to lose players, or how can we keep the credibility within? So I think this is very, very interesting. And I also think it's a great bridge to the next question, which are a bit about the big challenges that you see in balancing the environmental storytelling with player engagement and retention. I think these three things can be tied together very nicely, but it would be great if you can elaborate on the challenges and the opportunities that there are also here.
Yeah, absolutely. I was lucky enough to get to be part of a project a couple of years ago where I got to have really in-depth chats with 15 game studios who are working on green games, and I got to ask them these questions. Like, how are you balancing these concerns? How are you thinking about these challenges? What challenges did you not expect that you did find? How did you problem solve your way through this? These are all game studios that are making commercial games, so they don't need to make games that are engaging and fun and sell so that they can keep being a studio. And they were moved to make just completely environmental games that had this at their heart and core. And I guess the short version, right? So the report is Gaming for Climate Action. It's free to read. It's hosted by the Climate Resilience Center at the Atlantic Council. But the super short version for now is, there were 4 key trouble areas that teams got stuck on and then had to problem solve their way through. And one was when a team set out to make a game that's about the environment. That's, as we just talked about, this huge topic. So a team really, they all needed to learn to really focus and get as narrow and tight as possible because, creativity thrives in constraints, and trying to grapple with everything is just really overwhelming. That meant then they could do some research into and to do some thinking about, okay, how do they want to move their player about that specific thing? So if it is about, to go back to our previous example, if it's about extreme heat, do you want your player to know the signs of heat stroke? Or do you want your player to know that heat waves kill more people than every other natural disaster combined? Or do you just want to tell a moving personal story? You just need to know so you can work towards that goal. And a lot of teams got lost, again, just overwhelmed by the scale, until they recentered back on a specific objective. And then I think the last 2 things we found really go back to the heart of the question you asked, which is the last 2 challenges were teams struggled blending facts and fantasy in these game worlds. Like, how do you find the right balance of making a game that is about a real issue, but also it's inevitably abstracted because we're making games and we're not going to simulate reality. That's impossible. And also maybe it's a fantasy story or a sci-fi story or it's a different world. And then how do you make this kind of anxiety-inducing serious topic fun, or if not fun, compelling and engaging, something that people want to spend their time with? And we heard some really interesting strategies of balancing these two. There was, I don't know if you're familiar with the board game Daybreak. They have written some publicly available design blogs, which beautifully detail their super iterative design process, where they just kept trying and trying and trying to make a game about the carbon cycle. Like, it was a game where you work cooperatively with your other players to prevent the atmosphere from being so overloaded with carbon that you reach a tipping point that the world ends. And that's a really complicated system. And it's a board game. You don't even have a computer doing math for you. So they just there's a beautiful part of their dev blog where they goes through 50, 100 different versions of their board, where they kept trying and trying and trying. But what you see from maybe a different perspective is they're doing climate communication. It's a beautiful example of iterative climate communication, where they try a message, it bounces, they try it again, and they keep honing and refining. And in many ways, I think maybe climate communication can learn a little bit about the game design process. Game developers can be really good communicators because we're trained in this sort of iterative method of communication. And then,
absolutely.
Just really quickly on making games fun, to touch that last point, there's a GDC talk, I think, that's up on YouTube from Sam Alfred, who I also had a chat with. He was the design lead of Terra Nil, which was published on Netflix, which is a game it's kind of like a reverse city builder where you're rewilding instead of building up buildings. And he talked a lot about the opportunities that the reason the game ended up being so special is because the theme that was so important to them about rewilding was at odds with the gameplay genre of kind of extracting resources and building buildings. And it forced them to kind of deconstruct their gameplay and reconstruct it back up with this new exciting twist in a way that they wouldn't have discovered. So for them, really caring about their environmental themes presented an opportunity to find new, novel ways of creating fun. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be at odds. These two things don't have to be at odds. games and play, you can find fun, engaging intricacies and all the little details in the way the systems connect if you are able to spend the time looking for it.
Absolutely. Especially, what you mentioned about storytelling. I think that's the core when it comes to like how do we tackle facts versus fantasies, eco anxiety, greenwashing. And you mentioned it yourself, like in the gaming industry, there needs to be such good communication and there needs to be a great storytelling to be able to bring players and to retain the players. I think this is huge, the storytelling. And I think it's something that is often overlooked a lot when a game comes out, when a game is launched. Storytelling is basically all. It will define so much about the game, of course, also the game design, the experience for the gamer. But the storytelling, I think it tackles all of what you said, like facts versus fantasies. Like at Dotseco, we like to say that we are like creating real world impact in the virtual worlds. And this is literally what we are doing. And I think these two coming together, like virtual world impact and real world impact, I think it's a really great way to say it instead of thinking about it like facts versus fantasy, because we're giving the possibility to create real impact within the game. And I think this is a super interesting thing.
Yeah.
But then also the eco anxiety. This is basically why Dotseco was started, because our founders were feeling such the eco anxiety of what is going to happen to my kids, what is going to happen to future generations, what can we do? And then when you think about it through the angle of gaming, there is such a nice way that you can really tackle environmental impact in a way that doesn't freak you out. It's really about creating a virtual world where you're given the opportunity to do something good, or where you're being educated, or where there's a different CTA rather than reading a end of the world in 15 years, or Paris Agreement no longer possible, or all of these crazy headlines, or wildfires in Greece, in California, in everywhere. Basically, I think this is something that just blocks humans, like
Yes.
we're not made for crisis, like we literally freeze. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
please go.
No, that's just so well said. Obviously, it's not kind to raise people's anxieties. It's also not useful or productive, as you're saying, because we humans freeze in the face of danger, right? We run or we freeze if we can't run. And it's really hard to run away from a general sense of the climate crisis. So we freeze, and it is hard to take any productive action. What we want to do, right? What Dotseco does, what all these games or many of these games intend to do, is empower people and thus their communities and thus their local communities and also bigger communities and eventually governments to actually take meaningful, productive action to make their homes and selves and neighborhoods more resilient, which means they are able to better survive the effects of climate impacts and also ultimately mitigate and reduce the damage too. It's not kind to just say freak out. Oh, everyone! There's enough evidence. People know what's happening in general. What do we do next is what people want to know and need to know. And it's a really, really complicated question. So the more we can do to help answer that question for different people in different places, the better.
And I think the cool thing about it, Trevin, is that when you are incorporating sustainability inside a game of any type, you're not just doing good for the planet, but it's proven that you're also doing good for the game. And I think that this is the real win-win. And it's actually, I like to call it the triple win, because then you're doing good for the planet, which is amazing, real world impact. Of course, if you do it the right, clean way, then you're doing good for your game studio, and then you're letting your players feel good about themselves. So then I think when you merge all of those three, you have kind of a utopia in gaming, I would say. And I think, why wouldn't gaming studios want to do this at the end of the day, blend those three things that at the end are boosting key in-game KPIs, engagement, retention, player sentiment, DAO, ARPU, all of these, we see that it's working. So if it's working and if it's doing good for the game studio, what's the harm then in start to incorporate more conscious way of creating the game, launch, innovation within the game even.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess a thing I would add to that in support of it all is I know, because I've been doing this for 15 years, I know that it's really important to think about the business considerations of everything you do. As you mentioned, right, this can be a boost to that. I think I've talked to some teams that are worried that this is a trend, and to that I can say, very unfortunately, the climate crisis is not going away.
Absolutely.
It's only going to get worse before it gets better. And we know that people more and more are impacted by it all over the world. So this is not, I don't see this as like a temporary project that only persists when, for example, this is not a project that depends on any one or a handful of governments giving it their full support. This is a project that is kind of the work of a lifetime and will be meaningful for the lifetime. And your audience will only grow for better or worse. But in many ways for better, in that it means we can come together as a community, and as local and global communities come together around this, we can support each other and learn and develop responses and interventions together.
Do you feel that based on these, what do you think will happen in the next 5 or 10 years? Do you feel like sustainability, as we discussed, could become a recognized genre, or will it become just an integrated layer throughout the different games? How do you see the evolution of that?
Yeah, so I've had some interesting discussions on the genre question with some people that have thought about it even more than me. And they pointed out, I think, what you mentioned, something you mentioned earlier, which is there is always a danger of greenwashing, right? There's a danger that if you stick a green game label as a genre on like a Steam store, and it becomes, as you said, right, like a proven benefit where you get more engagement from interested players, then like commercial incentives would seem to suggest that people would then try to get that label as quickly as possible.
That's interesting.
And that would then water down the genre, and then it would get... So I think the concern is valid, because I do think in all contexts, greenwashing is seductive. It's why it keeps happening. It is easier to greenwash than it is to do real meaningful work. So that's always going to be a path that some unfortunately choose to take. However, I don't actually think that green games are going to become a useful genre, because I don't think, in a lot of exciting ways, I don't think it provides useful information about what you're going to experience in the game, right? So like Terra Nil, we just talked about, is a kind of reverse city builder strategy game, a green game, really cool. We've got Out and About by Yalda Games, which is about foraging and building a community around foraging. Very different gameplay, still a green game. But the experience you're going to get when you sit down to play it is not really comparable. And genre, I think, historically is used to set an expectation of what you're going to get. And one of the amazing, beautiful things about green games and about environmental games is that because it's so complicated, there's so many opportunities to explore different experiences. So I think there are going to be some green games that some people really enjoy, those games, and then there could be other versions that other people don't enjoy. And there's a lot of room. And that, I think, is really nice.
It's very interesting what you said about the genre becoming like a potential way for greenwashing, because it had never crossed my mind. Actually, when I thought about this question, like I didn't even think about it. I thought like, oh, it would be so cool. But it's very naive, because of course at the end of the day, like it's true, like everyone wants to be labeled as green these days, you know, everyone wants all the B Corp certifications and all the other certifications, and there are like endless certifications today, and the more you have them and the more you brag about them, the more you attract apparently, and then in that way there is a huge room to open the doors, I guess, for greenwashing, and I think the only way to do that is to really be transparent in how you're designing your game and the impact that you're translating from the virtual world to the real world. So how are you going to be accountable for the impact that you're saying that you will be doing? Or if you're building a game that is energy efficient, how will your players know it's actually energy efficient? And I think this is really the challenge that there is, right? How to be as transparent as you can and as impactful as you can in building a green game.
Yeah, absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And I know that there's still more work to be done in supporting teams that are interested in doing this work, in terms of equipping them with the tools they need and the frameworks they need to be transparent, to understand how to measure and report. There's some really great work being done by different organizations around the world, helping teams understand how to measure their carbon impact, how to measure their energy use, how to measure their impacts. But there's still undeniably a lot of work that needs to be done to understand the best methods, the best practices. So that work is ongoing, and every year we learn more. And then something I do like about this industry is that we share information, and
that's true.
And we learn from each other pretty quickly.
Really cool. Thank you, Trevin. Just to wrap up, what advice would you give to indie developers or small studios looking to build games that make an environmental impact while still being commercially viable and fun to play?
Yeah, so I mentioned the Game Over Climate Action Report, which has those breakdown of challenges. I think that's a really nice free resource. I'll take 1 second to plug, this is the first time I'm going to mention this, you got an exclusive,
Cool.
that we are going to, we're coming out with a book. I'm co-editor with Dr. Clayton Whittle and Dr. Patrick Prax.
That's so cool.
And we're publishing a book with CRC Press. And it's going to be out at the end of the year, and it's just a collection of authors writing different chapters about their experiences here. And I think it's going to be a really great way to dig in on like the expert details. Like we've got Dr. Anya Venter from Free Lives writing about the design development of Terra Nil. We've got Jennifer Asteris, who is the game director of Monument Valley 3, writing about her experience as a game dev activist. We've got Arnaud Fayol of Ubisoft, offering a ton of concrete methods for making any type of game green. We've got David Lum, who's a journalist, writing about how green game developers can get journalists to pay attention to their work. I could list every chapter. I'm not going to do that. But people, you can wishlist it. If it's up your alley, I think you should check it out. My final piece of advice, again, in terms of like free and available to everyone, is don't do this work alone. I've talked to now hundreds of developers making green stuff around the world, and the most common thing I hear is they wish they were better connected to other people doing similar work. So now is the time to do that. It really does help to be connected. You could share tips and tricks, share expertise, but also you can not feel alone on days when you're feeling overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the challenges, and that helps so much. It's how I keep going. I would think the same is for you, right? It's our communities that keep us equipped to work on these in this challenging environment. And again, step by step, we make progress.
Yeah, conversation, really, I loved the talk. It felt so natural, and it was just super good to have all of your insights. I think it was a great episode. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Take care of yourself.